Did you know that cricket coach Bob Woolmer was allegedly murdered in his hotel room during a tournament, and that a terror attack on the Sri Lankan cricket team resulted in 8 deaths? For a game that brings joy to millions, cricket has had its share of dark days and scandals. One of the most tragic stories in cricket happened during the 2007 World Cup. While attending as coach of the Pakistan team, Bob Woolmer was discovered dead in his Kingston, Jamaica hotel room. Initial reports presumed it to be a heart attack, since there didn't seem to be immediate signs of foul play. However, that quickly shifted, as Woolmer's death was deemed to potentially be much more complicated. A pathologist named Herschelle examined the body and later revealed his conclusion that Woolmer didn't die of a heart attack.
Was due to asphyxia.
And more specifically, Herschelle claimed it was as a result of being strangled by another person. This claim rocked the cricket world and became the immediate talk of the World Cup, overshadowing the actual matches. There was an inquest regarding the death, but a panel of 11 people ended up deciding there was not enough evidence to decipher what happened to Woolmer. It was one of the most stunning and tragic events in cricket history. In 2009, tragedy struck the streets of Lahore, Pakistan. The Sri Lankan team was visiting and headed on the team bus to play a match at Gaddafi Stadium. Suddenly, mass terrorists launched an attack on the bus, trying to harm the players. The players on the team were quite fortunate, though 5 of them ended up with minor injuries. But overall, they escaped unscathed. But tragically, 8 other people were killed. 6 of them were security personnel, and 2 were unaffiliated citizens. It was a true horror spectacle and a tragedy of the utmost gravity. The test that day in Lahore was obviously called off immediately, as was that entire tour. It was considered too dangerous for these teams to be traveling to play matches. Though they did make it to the stadium, the Sri Lankan team didn't risk a journey out of it on their own. Instead, they were given an emergency evacuation and were brought to an air base near the stadium. They quickly flew back to Sri Lanka. Though there had been previous incidents involving terrorism in the world of cricket, those had been peripheral. This incident marked the first time that actual players were the targets of an attack, and it certainly rocked the cricket world. And it was the first such attack since 1972 on an international team. At the Munich Olympics, Palestinian terrorists slaughtered 11 Israeli athletes. There have been numerous instances of match fixing and spot fixing in cricket over the years, but perhaps the most notorious happened in 2000. The captain of the South African team, Hansie Cronje, was charged by Indian police for fixing the one-day internationals versus India in March of that year. At first, Cronje fought back against the allegations, claiming that he had done nothing wrong. But as evidence started to pile up, it became clear he had done it. Eventually, he ended up admitting this crime to Ali Baker, the managing director of the Board of South African Cricket. Even his former teammates began to admit that Cronje had, at numerous times, tried to offer them large amounts of cash in exchange for throwing games. Interestingly enough, he tried to pass off some of the blame to Mohammed Azharuddin by using the defense that Azharuddin had made the original intro between Cronje and the bookie who asked him to fix the match. And while that didn't really persuade anyone that Cronje wasn't guilty, it did lead to more investigations. Because of those investigations, it was discovered that Mohammed Azharuddin had participated in match fixing as well. Both Azharuddin and Cronje were subsequently banned for life from the sport. The story had a bizarre twist ending 2 years later when Cronje died in a plane crash. There were rumors that perhaps the crash was a result of wrongdoing, and that Cronje was essentially killed for his actions. Nothing further has come of those rumors, however, and Cronje's crime remains a black eye for the sport. If there are any fans who assume that cricket players live a life of debauchery, Herschelle Gibbs' memoir certainly went a long way in confirming that. Gibbs, a long-time South African cricket player, had a reputation for being a bit of a rebel during his playing years, and he solidified that reputation when he released a memoir in 2010 titled to the point. The book chronicled the various ways that Gibbs had lived a very rock and roll lifestyle while playing. There were some aspects of the story that were known, like his 6-month ban from the sport after being involved in the infamous match-fixing scandal with Hanze Cronje. But he also went into lurid detail on the many vices he enjoyed. He talked about his ups and downs as an alcoholic, having been in and out of rehab facilities. He also candidly discussed how much marijuana he had smoked and went into details about the many sexual escapades he had. Some of those escapades were in groups and reportedly involved some of his teammates from the South African team. He also accused teammate Graham Smith of essentially being the ringleader of a clique of players who engaged in naughty behavior. He claimed that coach Mickey Arthur lacked the ability to control this clique, which only led to more scandalous behavior. Match fixing isn't the only kind of insider fixing that can happen in cricket. There is also the crime of spot fixing. It essentially means fixing certain elements of the match that can be bet on, without fixing the final result of the match. One of the most notorious incidents of spot fixing came in 2013, when 3 players on the Rajasthan Royals were arrested by police in Delhi, India. Srisanth, Ajit Chandila, and Ankit Chavan were charged with spot-fixing matches in the IPL, or Indian Premier League. But the supposed wrongdoing didn't stop with those 3. In an unrelated case at the same time, 4 other people were arrested in Mumbai on suspicion of similar betting charges. The many arrests sent the cricket world reeling. It was alleged that they were all part of a much larger organized crime-led betting circle. Interestingly enough, Srisanth, Chandila, and Chavan were tried in the Patiala House courts and found not guilty, and yet they were given lifetime bans from the sport. This was corrected, however, when the Supreme Court lifted their bans in recent years. India is not the only country susceptible to spot fixing, as evidenced by the 2010 allegations against 3 Pakistani players, Mohammad Amir, Mohammad Asif, and Salman Butt, were charged that year with spot fixing during a test against England. Apparently, they got bribed by a bookie to do certain on-field actions, like purposeful no-balls. The trio were banned for life by the International Cricket Council after a 5-week deliberation. However, things only got worse for the players. The case was moved to criminal court in England. Salman Butt got a sentence of more than 2 years in prison, while Asif got a year in prison, and Amir got 6 months. Sometimes simply trash talking can cause a bit of a scandal. Such was the case with Glenn McGrath and Ramnaresh Sarwan. The two were playing on the 4th day of an Australian versus West Indies test in 2003 in Antigua. As can happen in sport, the two had a disagreement, and things got a bit heated. They started throwing verbal jabs at each other. This perhaps would have been the end of it had McGrath not made the unfortunate decision to bring Sarwan's love life into it. McGrath made a comment that alluded to Sarwan having an affair with the wife of his teammate, Brian Lara. In response, Sarwan decided to take things even lower by making a derogatory comment about McGrath's wife. Now, this type of trash talking isn't the worst thing in the world, nor is it that notable in sports. Some scandals are a little more standard, involving players accused of taking performance-enhancing drugs. Such was the case with Australian cricketer Shane Warne. During the World Cup in 2003, Shane was reported to have a positive drug test for a banned diuretic. Warne immediately tried to spin the situation, claiming he was taking it for recovering from a shoulder surgery. He said that he'd been suffering from weight gain and fluid buildup after the surgery and was simply taking the diuretic to improve his physical appearance. But the World Anti-Doping Authority wasn't buying that excuse. This is primarily because the diuretic in question is often utilized to cover up the existence of other PEDs in drug tests. So they assumed that was the case with Warne. He was forced to head home early from the World Cup and was given a 1-year ban from the sport as well. Okay, now that we've learned about some of the worst moments and scandals in cricket, let's also try to remember that most of the time it's a wonderful and fun sport that is loved by people all over the globe. You with me? Okay, great. Have any thoughts on these dark days for cricket? pop them into the comments section.